page in terms of exactly what artificial intelligence is. So it's that simulation of human intelligence. It's machines that are programmed to think like humans and attempt to mimic their actions as well. The term also can be applied to any machine that exhibits traits associated with the human mind, such as learning and problem solving as well. And we can break that down into three categories. And I get that this is kind of relatively new terminology, so I'll kind of try and take you through in as supportive and nurturing fashion as possible. I've got a glamorous assistant on here today, and I can't see him smiling because I've only got two screens, but I can bet you he's smiling at me saying that. And that's Adrian. And what Adrian will do is he'll kind of try and minimize the beeping in my ear and also kind of collate any questions at the end to save me panic having to go through a million different chat messages from teams, etc., etc. So Adrian is a glamorous assistant. If you want to give him a shout out, I'm sure he would be appreciative of that. So we've had the kind of introduction and explanation of what artificial intelligence is, but you can break artificial intelligence down into three subsets. And you can see the subsets on the screen here. We've got artificial intelligence ANI, or artificial narrow intelligence. That's also known as weak AI. And then we've got artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence. And so weak AI is defined by its ability to complete a very specific task. So it could be winning a chess game, or maybe identifying an individual from a series of photos. And as we move on to stronger forms of AI, like general intelligence and super intelligence, the incorporation of more human behaviors becomes a little bit more prominent. And that might be the ability to interpret tone or emotion. For example, chatbots, virtual assistants like Siri, they're scratching the surface of this. And at the moment, they're examples of artificial narrow intelligence, not necessarily general or super intelligence. And strong AI, so that would be AGI, artificial general intelligence, and artificial super intelligence. That's defined by its ability in comparison to humans. So artificial general intelligence, that will perform on par with a human, whereas artificial super intelligence would surpass any human's intelligence ability. And so neither forms of that strong AI exist, but obviously there's research in terms of this field is obviously ongoing. And there are people that suggest that if and when and it's not guaranteed that we ever necessarily will, but if we were to develop an artificial super intelligence, that might be the last thing that humanity ever invent, because everything else that would be invented would be surpassed by the artificial super intelligence version. So that's just a kind of a baseline in terms of AI and the three kind of subsets within AI: narrow intelligence, general intelligence, and super intelligence. We're at narrow intelligence now with our AI capabilities such as ChatGPT and CoPilot, obviously. General intelligence and super intelligence, not quite there yet. And there's lots of kind of suggestions about when we might reach artificial general intelligence. Some people think it will take a couple of years. Some people think it will take another decade. Some people think it will take another kind of 50 years. So it's a really interesting space to kind of keep your eyes on. So what is generative AI? We've heard this term generative AI has kind of come into being in the last probably year and a half. And generative AI, really all it is a branch of AI that's focused on creating new content. So that could be images, text, audio, ChatGPT, CoPilot, Claude AI. There are lots and lots of these large language models that are coming into being at the moment. And they are obviously generating entirely novel either images or text or audio. And that's obviously a very good thing in terms of generating new content, but does give quite a lot of concern in terms of intellectual property rights, etc., etc., etc. And we can kind of think of CoPilot almost in that generative AI space. It's going to assist us in creating text or maybe audio or maybe images as well. And hopefully we'll see a couple of those examples as we go through today's session. So specifically, we're talking about CoPilot. And CoPilot is really, it's a digital companion. And it very much is in the idea of a CoPilot is someone there to assist you. So it's not the idea of someone taking over your role, it's someone enhancing your role. And so it's really characterized as a digital companion, helps you with lots and lots of different tasks and different domains. And it's using the power of AI and natural language, which I think is really one of the best aspects of it. You're really able to interact with these types of large language models or this type of generative AI in natural language. Although it is fair to say that if we can start to understand how these AI models are powered and how they work, actually we can we can better train them and better prompt them with more specific prompts. And we'll get onto some of the differences around prompts a little bit later in the session. So you can chat with CoPilot. You can ask it to do things like write an email, maybe create a presentation, find information. And it's integrated quite effectively with lots of different Microsoft 365 apps. So you'll find CoPilot in Outlook, PowerPoint, and Teams. And the idea is to provide that seamless and personalized experience as well. And over time, CoPilot will start to learn as you as an individual, and start to characterize and develop responses and kind of information back to you specifically in the way that you would want. One of the cool things with CoPilot is you can access it from any device on any platform. It will remember you and your prompt preferences and context across those different kind of applications and different sessions as well. And the idea behind CoPilot is to boost our productivity, creativity, efficiency, as well as to find new growth opportunities and insights as well. But one of the coolest things for me is CoPilot can help alleviate some of that some of those more mundane elements of our work life. So it can help us automate some of those repetitive tasks. It's generative AI, so it can generate new ideas, can help us discover new information as well. And it will also provide feedback and suggestions and recommendations to improve our work and our outcomes as well. It does go a little bit further than that. CoPilot can also help to build our own, maybe organizational copilots. And we can use tools like CoPilot Studio or Azure AI Studio, and we can customize and extend CoPilot's capabilities to meet our specific needs and our preferences as well. And it might be that whilst we might have an organizational implementation of CoPilot, it might be there's a specific finance implementation with our business, maybe a specific marketing implementation. And that's where we can start to leverage not only CoPilot's generative AI capabilities, but lots of the information that we hold as organizations as well. And I think it's fair to say with the emergence of ChatGPT and Claude AI, and I will not name every single generative AI tool, those tools are only as good as the training data that they are given. And one of the big things that those tools are missing is our internal data. So what internal information are we recording? And that's where CoPilot can really come into its own, because it's part of the Microsoft kind of environment. It's much easier to give CoPilot access to some of our own organizational data. So we're marrying up that large language model capability that we all kind of know and love with some of the specificity around actually our own organizational data. And when we combine those two things together, we're really very much in a strong place. And CoPilot's also there to help protect our data and environment. It has enterprise grade security, privacy and compliance, and it follows the highest standards of data protection and governance and respects your choices and consent as well. And wherever it can do it, it will adhere to kind of any ethical principles, any best practices of AI. And I suppose those ethical principles and those best practices, this is a relatively new technology, they're developing over time. But I suppose the goal is to make sure that the outputs are fair, transparent, and accountable. And we'll have a little bit of a live session as we get in, and I'll show you some of the capability around CoPilot, although admittedly not the entirety of its capability. It is an incredibly capable bit of software. In terms of Microsoft's vision, the idea behind it is to empower employees in every business function with AI-powered chat and integrations, and specifically integration with the Microsoft 365 application as well. It's there to boost productivity and creativity and efficiency. It's also there to help us find new growth opportunities and insights as well. And over time, we'll get the power to build our own copilots using generative AI apps like CoPilot Studio, Azure AI Studio, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying just a minute ago, that large language models are really powerful, but when we combine them with the data that our organizations record, which these large language models traditionally don't have access to, then we're in a really powerful space for both ourselves and our organizations. But there's also a huge data protection element to it as well. So CoPilot is going to be there to protect data and environments. It'll include enterprise-grade security, privacy, and compliance features as well, which I think is actually really key. And one of the big things around, for instance, ChatGPT is a lot of the prompts that are used in ChatGPT, particularly the free version, the prompts and the results are also used to build the training data set as well. So you could inadvertently give away the secret source to your organization if you're not kind of careful in terms of the way that you're using these large language models. Next slide is around how AI is being used. So there's obviously lots and lots of research that's kind of knocking around in terms of how artificial intelligence is being used. These couple of images and graphics you can see here are from how businesses are using artificial intelligence in 2024 from Forbes, so a relatively kind of reliable source. And you can see the ways that businesses are using artificial intelligence as it stands. And it's very much at the moment, and this is more than likely to change kind of over time as this technology becomes more and more bedded within our kind of daily lives and our daily work as well. A lot of customer service pieces as well. So clearly, if you've used ChatGPT or Claude AI or the million other large language models, they actually look and feel like humans in terms of the way they respond. So there's clearly the capability to use them in customer service, to maybe triage some of the customer service queries that we've got, that they can be answered by the large language model. That is amazing. And if they can't, obviously they need to be handed to a human that can hopefully take on that query and answer it effectively. But you'll also start to see AI being used in terms of cybersecurity, fraud management. So looking for maybe fraudulent transactions, looking for patterns in terms of larger data sets, digital personal assistants, customer relationship management as well. So we could even have an AI powered bots such as CoPilot automatically email some of our customers in terms of maintaining that relationship, maybe advising them of a new product or service. Inventory management, content production, product recommendations, accounting, supply chain operations, recruitment and talent sourcing. Although that does come with a bit of a warning in terms of there are some countries and some states within America that are starting to minimize the use of large language models in terms of recruitment and talent sourcing, audience segmentation as well. So that's how kind of Forbes are expecting and are seeing AI being used. And internally, some of the more specific elements that we're seeing artificial intelligence being used in terms of improving processes, so maybe search engine optimization, automating some processes as well. Some of those more mundane, relatively bland internal communications. We can start to use it to aggregate our business data for us as well. And we might see a little bit, or hopefully we'll see a little bit of that as long as Excel works for me, in terms of using it in terms of analytics in some sense. Idea generation, safety risks, writing code. One of the things that I found personally that large language models like CoPilot are really, really effective at is taking our code and starting to articulate to us maybe some more efficiencies that we can drive into our code. Maybe there's an error that's been generated by our first kind of run through developing some code, and large language models like CoPilot can really help us in terms of identifying which line is kind of responsible for the system or the piece of code not working, and suggesting how we might alleviate it, how we might solve it kind of moving forward. So how does it actually work? Well, CoPilot works through a process called recurrent neural networks. And whilst I won't deep dive hugely specifically, there will be a couple of slides. We're not going to have an hour session just on recurrent neural networks. And we could have a couple of days specifically on that topic. It uses recurrent neural networks to learn patterns from a vast amount of training data. And these networks enable CoPilot to understand and interpret context. And when it understands and interprets context, it can make intelligent predictions based on the inputs that it's given. It's using the GPT-4 language model that powers CoPilot. It has been trained on a diverse range of text sources, allowing it to possess huge amounts of knowledge that it can apply to generate relevant and coherent content as well. And perhaps that's one of the most important parts and one of the fundamental things to kind of wrap your head around, in terms of these large language models are built from things like Reddit or internal data sets, maybe more predominantly external data sets. And I'm trying to think of the Wikipedia page, and it has escaped me. But the Wikipedia page, which kind of details lots and lots of information about varying things. So these large language models are given huge training data sets, but they tend to be publicly available data sets. Whereas our own internal data, clearly quite often, particularly the internal stuff, is not publicly facing. And so what CoPilot aims to do is marry up that large language model piece that ChatGPT and Claude AI and a million different other large language models have really nailed. But the big thing that those large language models are missing is all the internally recorded data that we've recorded as organizations. And that's where CoPilot really comes into its own. So it's using that GPT-4 large language model that ChatGPT uses, but clearly, because it's part of the Microsoft kind of ecosystem, it's got access to a lot of our internal data as well. And when we spin out into a bit of a live demo, hopefully we'll see that working. Fingers crossed. You can never rely on if you need to rely on the internet, sometimes it can let you down, but hopefully that's not one of those days. So some of the fundamental technology that these large language models, such as CoPilot, are based on are what are called neural networks. And neural networks are a type of machine learning algorithm that's actually modeled on the structure of the human brain. And what they are is they're composed of layers of interconnected nodes, also called artificial neurons. And those neural networks can be used for a variety of different tasks. And by adjusting the connections between those neurons during a process called training, we can start to derive really powerful classification, regression, and clustering capabilities. And these models and these networks are capable of learning patterns and relationships within data, and that allows them to make predictions and support the decision-making process as well. And one of the most powerful branches of neural networks is deep learning. And a deep learning is a subfield of neural networks, and that involves training large, complex models for tasks such as image or speech recognition. So we might have 100 million pictures of animals, and we just want the large or the neural network just to identify all the cats. And so to be able to do that, we'll need to give the neural network huge numbers of examples of cats, and it can then work out the salient information that a cat picture holds, and it can apply that salient information to any other image that we supply it. And it will be given the simple task of, is this a cat or is this not a cat? So they're all based on neural networks. The specific type of neural network that the likes of CoPilot are using are what's called a recurrent neural network. And a recurrent neural network is a type of neural network that loops and enables information to persist across time. And these types of neural networks are widely used in natural language processing. So things like speech recognition, maybe time series prediction as well. And unlike standard neural networks, also coined as feed-forward neural networks, these recurrent neural networks can handle variable length sequences of inputs and outputs. They're not having to base themselves on fixed length sequences of inputs or outputs as well. They can handle varying lengths of inputs and outputs, which makes them more and more powerful. And the memory of a recurrent neural network is called its hidden state. And that hidden state is updated after each step. So imagine you're writing a story where each sentence builds upon the previous one. These recurrent neural networks work similarly by processing one word or character at a time, but whilst remembering what was said before. So just as we might refer back to previous events in a story to understand the current context, recurrent neural networks use their memory to understand the sequence of their processing. A normal neural network, that will use what's called a tokenized word vector of each review as an input, but it looks at each review in a single atomic unit, whereas a recurrent neural network looks at a larger kind of corpus of information. And a more precise way of analyzing reviews might be to take into account each position of each word within the review and how that sentence is constructed, because the structure of a sentence also plays a role in giving it meaning as well. So for example, if I just kick through the animations very quickly, what this type of neural network would do would be to break down each individual word. Generally, what we do in natural language processing is we remove what is called stop words. So any word that doesn't really have any meaning, so the words that says this and the and was, we probably would remove those. So we would just process the important words, the words with semantic meaning. And these types of neural networks, they look at reviews as an ordered sequence of words, not necessarily each individual atomic unit, because each sequence of words can also have an arbitrary length, and each sentence can be made up of different words as well. And this is where these recurrent neural networks really come in. And recurrent neural networks act like a chain, and the computation performed at each step depends on the previous computation. And these types of recurrent neural networks, clearly they're used in large language models like CoPilot, like ChatGPT, but they're used extensively in natural language processing. They've also been used to generate handwritten text, maybe perform machine translation and speech recognition as well. But very specifically, their applications are not restricted to processing language. For instance, computer vision recurrent neural networks have been used in tasks like image captioning and question and answer. But how does it specifically work in CoPilot? So one of the cool things about CoPilot is that when you get access to CoPilot, and it is still in its pilot phase, and it is getting used by more and more individuals, there are a couple of different things to it that you need to wrap your head around. And actually, it can be a little bit of a complicated ecosystem. There are quite a lot of different aspects to it, some of which perform the same roles, but they might be attached to different pieces of software. But if you get into your into your being, that there are kind of predominantly two real types of CoPilot. There's a CoPilot Work and a CoPilot Web, and there's also a CoPilot Notebook as well, which kind of enhances both the use of Work and Web as well. And actually, I think this is a really, really important differentiation. So if you're using CoPilot Work, none of your prompts, none of the results that CoPilot has produced are going to be fed back into the larger training data set. Whereas if you use CoPilot Web, those results, those prompts, they will be fed back into the large language model as well. So I think this is a really important differentiation, particularly for CoPilot. And it's positioned exactly perfectly in terms of most people using CoPilot are probably going to use it in a work setting. There needs to be that really strong differentiation between what is applicable for the web and what can be used in the training data and what can only be used at work as well. So for CoPilot Work, specifically designed for work-related tasks within an organization, the implementation is that it will work across our entire universe of data. So that could be emails, meetings, chats, documents, and more. And that is incredibly powerful, but will come with risks as well. There might be certain elements of work that we want to keep relatively tight in terms of a handful of people. We don't want that, even though it's work-based information, we don't want that to be used on kind of a wider basis. And the capabilities around CoPilot Work is to understand your organization's context and its files, and hopefully providing that comprehensive in-app experience infused with work data. So really bringing software and our work data together in a single environment. There are commercial data protection safeguards in place. Oh, I think someone might need to mute themselves. Adrian, if you could do me a favor and just keep your finger poised over the mute button, that would definitely help me out. In terms of commercial data protection, it obviously safeguards sensitive work, ensures compliance and confidentiality within your own organization's Office 365 or Microsoft 365 environment as well. Someone's decided to bring some music to the party as well. Happy days. I can't quite pick out what that is. If you can identify that song, let us know in the chat, and we can give you your plaudits for having a very, very keen ear. So in terms of CoPilot Web, predominantly used for personal use and simple web style prompts. It provides foundational AI assistance for more personalized tasks. There is a foundational free option for personal use and an advanced option as well. So if you did want to pay for an enhanced option, you could purchase CoPilot Pro, and we'll have a little look at some of the pricing of that as we get through the deck. And then we've got CoPilot Notebook, which is a feature within CoPilot. And it's, again, an AI chatbot powered AI, and it's used to create content. CoPilot, it serves as a new interface for crafting and improving our prompts. So if you've used CoPilot in the past, or maybe Claude AI, maybe ChatGPT, other large language models are available. You might have hit a character limit. You might have hit a token limit as well. So when I started to use ChatGPT, I would tell it I wanted US or UK English, and after 3 or 4 prompts, it'd revert back to US English. And that's to do with the tokens, the amount of kind of internal memory that these chatbots have, and large language models have. And I think the reality is the more that you pay, the longer, the more persistent its memory is going to be in terms of the interaction you've had with it. But you might have noticed the limitation. There are huge character limits, not huge character limits for CoPilot and for other large language models. And what CoPilot Notebook does is it allows us to write much more detailed prompts. So we're up to 18,000 characters in terms of the character limit for CoPilot Notebook, whereas for CoPilot, it's standard iteration. You're looking at a 4,000 character limit. And it's to make it easier to iterate on prompts. And as we get through the deck, we'll have a little bit of a look at the different types of prompts that you might want to design. And when we're in the kind of chain of thought, chain of feedback space, actually we might need more characters in order to properly direct our large language models. When you do access CoPilot Notebook, you will notice a little bit of a different layout in comparison to the normal standard chatbot interface. There's the ability to write a detailed prompt to collaborate with CoPilot. There's the ability for CoPilot to create your own content with you. But unlike regular CoPilot, which generates brand new results when you edit a prompt, what Notebook does is it retains the context of the previous answers, even after you've tweaked that prompt as well. So particularly if you're in a chain of thought or a chain of feedback place in terms of kind of directing these large language models, if you're using CoPilot Notebook, you're going to get access and you're going to be able to see all of the prompts that you've given it and be able to track how it's adapting the responses back to you as well. So we're going to attempt, and I do use the word attempt because it's like a bit like Blue Peter, but I don't think I'm going to get any animals urinating on me. But we are going to do a little bit of a practical exercise. I'm going to spin out and show you some of the CoPilot's capabilities live. All being well, that should go absolutely swimmingly. But live television or live webinars are not for the faint-hearted. I think that's fair to say. So the first bit we'll look at is kind of CoPilot's functionality with Excel. I've come from a data background. I've used kind of Excel for 20 years, so I was super keen and super excited to see how CoPilot could support me. And when I've used CoPilot within Excel, it's a little bit more prescriptive than it is using CoPilot in maybe Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or Outlook. It's quite a bit more prescriptive. There are a few more hoops for us to have to jump through. And the hoops are effectively the bullet points that we've got on here. So CoPilot in Excel can only be used with XLSX or XSLM files. They have to be shared to your OneDrive or your Microsoft 365 SharePoint locations. Autosave does also need to be on as well. So for those that are using Excel extensively, we might use CSV files within Excel. We would need to convert those to substantive Excel files in order to be able to get the functionality of CoPilot as well. I've just noticed I haven't yet skipped on the slide. The CoPilot button isn't active while editing files saved at locations on your computer or an unsupported file type. So it has to be shared within OneDrive or has to be saved within OneDrive. As soon as it's saved within OneDrive, as soon as it's a substantive Excel file, it will allow CoPilot to be used. CoPilot in Excel works for Excel tables up to 2 million cells. So Excel over the last couple of years has increased its capability in terms of using large data sets, but it is quite an intensive application, particularly when you marry it up with this type of large language model. So they have at the minute limited the table size to up to 2 million cells. It can take quite a bit of time to respond. It might take 30 seconds or more to get a response from CoPilot, and it's usually proportional to the size of table that we're using. The larger the table, probably the less time in terms of the response time we can expect in terms of a large table as well. It does work best with clean data. It's clearly in its pilot stage, so kind of CoPilot's capability is going to increase and enhance over time, but certainly at this moment it probably works better with clean data. And there are little bits of tricks with it as well. So for instance, you might have in Excel a single column with a bit of a strange date format. Maybe you've got the month separated by a comma to the day, separated by a comma to the year. Excel won't natively recognize that as a date format. So using CoPilot within Excel, it won't be able to convert that to a kind of a formalized date that actually Excel will recognize. But if we take that information out, and if we prompt CoPilot in a slightly different way and give it a lot more information, so for instance, you might have all of those strangely formatted dates in a single column in Excel, and you could use the Excel CoPilot to say to CoPilot, convert column A into a usable date format. It won't be able to do that. Whereas if you extract an example of the date format and put it in CoPilot in Excel as well, then it will be able to suggest some Excel formulas and kind of functions in order to be able to convert that date into a date format that actually Excel works with. So at the moment, it works best with clean data. And perhaps one of the most powerful bits, and not something I will demo because there's a 50-50 chance whether it'll work or it won't work. It's really good for software development, CoPilot, and other large language models. You can use it for Visual Basic scripts as well. Now, I have used it for Visual Basic scripts. It does work half of the time, and it doesn't work the other half of the time. So I'm not going to put you through watching me do a VBA script and spending about 15 minutes trying to troubleshoot it to make it work. But it is a relatively powerful bit of kit, and I suppose the more time you can spend getting to know it, getting to know its capabilities, it is going to be like a co-pilot for you at work. But we all have to accept that it is at the beginning. We're at the beginning of this upward curve of its capability and its usefulness and how it's going to be used. So the way that we're using it today might not be the way we're using it in 6 months' time, a year's time, 5 years' time. It's going to evolve over time. So it's not a static bit of software, just like any other bit of software. It's going to be updated on the fly as well. So let's attempt, and I do use the word attempt, to do a live demo. So if you just give me a couple of seconds to get my data sets into a place. So what we've got here is we've got a bit of a fake data set, and it's a Nike data set. So it's completely fake. It's sourced from a website called kaggle.com. And if you ever wanted to get into data science or improve your ability to analyze data using R, Python, and other tools such as that, Kaggle is a really good repository for lots and lots of data sets. There are a huge number of data sets on there, some of which have completely fake data, some of which have completely legitimate data. This is just a simple Nike sales data set that I managed to get off Kaggle as well, and that will hopefully just allow us the ability to run through some of the capabilities of CoPilot, hopefully being the key word, because it's like working with pets and you never necessarily know what that pet or animal is going to do. And if you've ever watched Blue Peter, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. So we can see here we've got a data table, relatively bland information. We've got its sales data from Nike, so we've got an invoice date, the type of product, the region it was sold, what the retailer was, the type of sales method, the state, and some little bits of information around price. What you'll notice is this isn't me having specifically colored this data table. For those are kind of extensive users of Excel, once you force Excel to understand that the data you're working with is in a tabular format and you specify that, Excel will color this in the kind of light blue, dark blue, white kind of format. And actually you need to put this data into a substantive Excel table in order to access the CoPilot button in the top right. So I'm going to press the CoPilot button here and hopefully not wait too long before it comes up with some prompts. And the first thing to kind of note is it's giving you some relatively simple prompts and some suggestions as well. So it might be you want to add a formula into some columns, and we'll do that in a little bit of time as well. It might be we want to highlight, sort, and filter or analyze. But what I want to do is I'm going to prompt it specifically. And I might not use the best English, but there's method to my madness. So I want to know how many different types of products are there. Oh, and I'm going to grab the little bit from, there we go. Grab it from my notes here. I'm going to ask it, how many different products are there? And the reason I'm using the word product and not products is because the actual variable name you can see in column B there is product. Whilst it might be able to understand products, particularly at the kind of the start of this type of technology, we're actually going to want to be really, really specific with it. So you can see it's already come up with a kind of a result. It's saying there are 6 distinct products. I'm going to add this to a new sheet as well. Because I'm a heavy user of Excel, I actually want to see how it's done this. And so if I click on the result there, you can see it's actually just generated a formula in order to be able to count the number of products that are in that data set that I've given it. And if you've used Excel extensively or even a little bit, you'll know there's 4 or 5 different ways to do that. I might have expected a pivot table, but I've definitely just got a function. And I suppose the difference between a pivot table and a normal function in a pivot table, if I double click that value, it would show me all of the kind of data that sits behind it as well. But you know what, a relatively quick count of all of the different products within that column as well. So I'm pretty happy with that. But what else can we do with it as well? So let's try and stretch it a little bit. What about, could it show me a table of total sales by product? Let me ask it this question. And this is where I have to sit there with all my toes and my fingers crossed to make sure it gives a prompt response. Because whilst I can fill for a period of time, there is a limitation to my ability to fill time. But in this situation, I don't have to fill time too much because it's already gone and generated me the response. So it's come up with a table here. I'm going to add it to a new sheet. And the difference here is that it's actually used a pivot table to generate this information rather than a function or a formula as well. So sometimes the questions you ask CoPilot, it will generate you a formula. Sometimes it will do it through a pivot table. There is probably the ability, almost definitely the ability to prompt, I would like a pivot table. I would like just a formula function. And we can see the total sales across the different types of product. And again, with a pivot table, we get a little bit of enhanced functionality with any pivot table. If I click back to the right worksheet, we double click any of those values, we can see the actual data that sits behind it. So I'm not going to go through the process of validating whether there is actually 1.9 million pounds or dollars worth of men's street footwear. I have validated it before I've come onto this webinar. It's given me exactly the same figures, and actually it's doing a pretty good job as well. What am I going to get it to do now? So I want to do a little bit of visualization. So I want to start to understand maybe some trends. So could I get CoPilot to generate a line graph showing sales over time? Well, we're going to find out because I'm going to ask it. And again, hopefully not have to do too much filling. And it can see it's working through its understanding and now analyzing the data. And fingers crossed, the Excel gods are shining on me today. It's actually gone and generated this graph here. So again, I'll add it to a new sheet so we can see it a little bit more effectively, make that a little bigger. So this is the total sales by invoice date. And I'm an analyst, a data analyst at heart, and obviously I'm interested in what's generating these spikes here and why there's such a big change in sales volumes from about January of 2021, but relatively busy graph. There's probably not a huge amount of insight I can derive other than maybe some seasonal trends that we're seeing in some of the spikes here. But actually, you know what, for a relatively short period of time, and maybe if I wasn't, I'm not going to coin myself an expert, but I have created many graphs in Excel in my career. I think that's fair to say. That's actually not a bad starter for 10, and probably will have saved me a little bit of time in terms of making that data. And you can see how it's done it as well. It's actually created a pivot table off the back and grouped the data by days as well in order to generate the total sales, which has then allowed it to produce this graph. But by the same token, there's maybe not a huge amount of insight I can get out of there other than the big change in sales here and maybe some seasonal trends, which could be driven by sales, could be driven by Christmas, Easter, Who knows until you do a little bit more deep dive around it. But actually, maybe I want to split that graph into sales by region, because we actually, if I flick back to the source data, we actually had a region as well. And whilst the graph that we've just produced is across all of the regions, maybe I'd want to see what main region was driving some of that increase in sales, particularly across kind of this period between 2020 and 2021 as well. So if I flip back to the live data set and then cross my fingers and my toes and give it another prompt, and so that this time I'm going to prompt it to create a line graph showing sales over time, and to specify I want individual lines for each region, which is effectively kind of using the series functionality within Excel. But maybe you were unaware of that capability, in which case this type of capability within CoPilot for using kind of doing analysis on data sets is actually really, really powerful. So it's gone and produced the chart. Again, I'm going to add it to a new sheet. You can see it's basically created a pivot table and then displayed all the data and then visualized it as well. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, I think, in terms of the pivot table, although if I click off, it should go. And we can see we've got these total sales over time, but by region and invoice date as well. And the first thing to note, I suppose, as an analyst, there's inconsistent data points, which is actually kind of substantiated by some of the gaps we've got in our data. So I'll shift that across there. In the Southwest, we don't appear to have any information recorded for the first few days of January. So there are gaps in the sales information. So I suppose it wouldn't take a genius to work out that maybe one of the first questions that we should ask, one of the first things we should figure out is why are all these gaps in the data set as well. But actually, maybe that is moderately helpful. One of the things that I'm kind of noticing, and a little trick I've got up my sleeve in terms of working in analytics for 20 years, is there's quite a big gap between some of the lower levels of data and some of the higher recorded levels of data. And sometimes that can make establishing patterns a little bit trickier. And whilst I won't necessarily do this to fruition, what I am going to ask it to do is create a logarithm of some of the sales data. And what that can do is a mathematical function. Sometimes we use it in analytics to kind of shrink the axes down so we can start to see patterns a little bit more effectively. So I'm going to ask it convert those total sales to a logarithmic value as well, which is a relatively simple kind of function to do in Excel. And it will generate that column relatively quickly as well. And it will also show me the formula that it's used as well. And you can see we created the total log of sales as well. Now for time, I'm not going to create a graph out of that, but that can help us sometimes in eliciting some of those patterns that we might see within a data set as well. It's one of the little mathematical tricks that we have within analytics. So you can see, as you know what, that's pretty decent capability. In terms of Excel. I don't think it's going to take my job away from me at any stage. And you do have to know a little bit in order to be able to prompt it effectively, but it is pretty powerful. I did have a Visual Basic script that I was going to show you, but it works 50% of the time and doesn't work the other 50% of the time. And in pressure situations such as these webinars, maybe it's not the time to get super advanced and try to break it. So that's Excel. What about Microsoft Word? So let's move over a Word onto the shared screen. And again, you can see the CoPilot button up here. And actually, it's kind of duplicated by the button down here as well. So it's already, I don't have to save a Word document in a specific format. It just works kind of natively out of the box as well. If you can't see your CoPilot button, I think if you press Alt and I, it will generate anyway. So all it's really done is just enhance this little piece here. And I'm going to test it. I'm going to ask it to write a marketing focused. Now, this is not, no, it's not the idea to remove anyone's job, but I'm going to ask it to create a marketing focused description of an IT training company. They're called Firebrand Training. I really should have pressed generate a little bit earlier because it might take a little bit of time to kind of generate that as well. But actually what it will do is it'll start to pull little bits of things from the internet. So I've not told it that we're the leading provider of accelerated training, which we are, and certification in the UK. So I've not told it anything about Firebrand other than the name of the organization, but it's done a pretty decent job at generating that marketing focused description of Firebrand. And clearly the idea of this is not to remove kind of marketing functions. The way that I see the use of this type of technology, it's like I've got to build a house and this is going to build the foundation for me. And actually, I think that's really cool because I don't have to concern myself with building the foundation. I can use my brain and my knowledge and my thinking to focus on more specific bits, knowing that CoPilot is there in the background. And if I really needed to create a kind of marketing focused description of Firebrand really quickly, you can see with very little effort, I've created one within about 30 seconds. Now, there is a kind of huge point to note here in terms of validation. Just because it looks legitimate doesn't mean it is legitimate, and there will need to be huge coats of validation to go on through all of this. So I would never ever just copy this onto a website or put this as any marketing material. This would need to be validated. Definitely validated. What we're going to do is I'm going to highlight the last couple of bullet points. Move that up there a little bit more, and I'm going to say to it, make this element, can you ever type when people watching, element more formal, and it will go and start to refine that draft as well. But it appears to doing it across the entire thing. So sometimes just highlighting, it doesn't necessarily figure out that you're highlighting something specific as well, which is quite interesting. But it will allow you to change the tone, to change maybe some of the artistic license around the output as well. So you can really start to cater the output specifically to around maybe your organization. If your organization works in a really serious domain, clearly you'd want to keep it maybe more formal, maybe more professional. But you can see here, we can start to change the way that it looks. And I'm going to press keep it there. And then what else can I do? The other cool thing that I found is, particularly if you want to create a table of data, so I'm just going to highlight those couple of paragraphs. There's a visualize as a table, and that's quite a powerful elements to CoPilot as well, particularly if, obviously if I want to put into a table elements of that kind of text. And whilst it's not super advanced and it's maybe not split this up into company and ethos and that type of stuff, different headings on those tables, it's actually created a half decent table relatively quickly as well. Right, next example is going to be in Outlook. So there's also Outlook in CoPilot as well. You can see it there. Slightly different approach. It's more of a coaching by CoPilot piece. So rather than having nothing, like we didn't have a description of Firebrand training before I got it to write me a description of Firebrand training, it's more in a coaching space. So I'm just going to give it a kind of a fake email here, emailing a colleague of mine called Bob. And then I'm going to hit CoPilot, do the coaching bit, and it's going to generate me some feedback in terms of the email. And it might suggest to be more formal or less formal, but it will give me kind of the capability to choose, and it will rewrite emails depending on the kind of the direction I've given it as well. So hopefully it won't take too long. I probably would have expected it to generate an output of the minute, but it hasn't quite yet. But it's saying the email is concise and direct. It could be more courteous and respectful to the reader. Maybe that's a personal thing that might need to be in my appraisal in terms of being more courteous. But you can change the tone. You can change the reader sentiment to try and engage the reader a little bit more. It can kind of suggest areas where you might want to add more clarity. Gives you the ability to regenerate it, but I'm burning through time very, very quickly here. So I'll just show you the next example, and that is in PowerPoint. So I'm going to have to load up another version of PowerPoint because I'm actually using a version of PowerPoint, but we should be able to overcome that. So if I put a version of PowerPoint over here, go for a blank presentation, and again, hit the CoPilot piece. I want to present. This is actually pretty powerful. I'm going to get it to do my job for me. So create a PowerPoint presentation on AI readiness and a strategy therein. And so actually CoPilot within PowerPoint is going to take that prompt and with any luck, deliver me a 5 to 6 to 7 slide kind of presentation on AI readiness with any luck. Fingers crossed. It is still working on it. And you know what? There it is. There's 6 slides on an AI readiness strategy. And clearly, like, one of the most important things, and I'll kind of say this, and I've lost my mouse cursor. I'm not sure CoPilot can help me with that. Oh, I have lost my mouse cursor. That's an interesting juxtaposition. I wonder whether someone has deliberately done that. There we go, it's come back. And it's actually generated a fairly decent deck. And you know what? I would see this as a foundation. Sometimes you struggle to get a little bit of inspiration. CoPilot can just provide you with that foundation then to build upon things. I also use CoPilot a lot for what I would normally do in terms of Google searches. So if I did actually have to generate an AI readiness strategy, I would do hours and hours and tens of hours worth of research on Google. And other, obviously, other search engines are available. But actually, what this CoPilot element within PowerPoint does gives me a good start for 10. Gives me a really good start for 10 as well. What I am going to do is stretch the capability of it as well. So I've gone and grabbed what I think is the hardest thing. Gone and grabbed an astrophysics paper. And I'm going to want it to, in fact, I'll show you an example of the actual paper that I've gone and grabbed. And the idea of this is I want to see what it's capable. How powerful is this thing? So I've gone and grabbed from the website ARXIV. There's probably a better way to pronounce that. A really interesting paper on globular galaxy clusters. And it's 11,000 words long. There is a lot to it. Pretty complicated thing. But what I'm going to do, and this is when I was testing the capabilities of PowerPoint, I want PowerPoint to create a presentation off the back of that 11,000 word, pretty complicated bit of text. And this, for me, I think is the really important bit, particularly when we're getting these hugely complicated documents. Create a new system and replace it. Yeah, I'll create a new draft. Yes, please. I did think for a fleeting second it was going to say I'm unable to do that, even though it's done that 10 times in the past for me. You never know. It's like working with animals and children. You never know what you're going to get next. But maybe you've got those really very, very complicated documents, and maybe you are tight for time and you haven't really got the time to invest to read all 11,000 words. There's a good chance that you probably should try and invest that time if it is of that level of importance. But one of the tricks around the PowerPoint version of CoPilot is that it will relatively confidently distill that information into a slide deck. Maybe you're a bit visual like me. Maybe that kind of the threat of those 11,000 words makes it a little bit more difficult to pick up the information in that presentation. Quite often I find having it in a PowerPoint a little bit easier to kind of digest. So it's already kind of, as an interim, defined the outline of what it's going to include in there, and it's now in the process of generating those slides. And with any luck, we'll be at 100% soon. He says 98, adding speaker notes as well. This really is a powerful bit of kit. So we've taken probably one of the most complex documents that we could come across, and we've got it to generate within about 35, 40 seconds, a PowerPoint presentation off the back of it. And whilst I might not be the biggest fan of the shade of green that it's decided to take, and actually this is the first time it's ever given me this shade of green, which is actually quite important. This CoPilot is constantly evolving. So the output you'll get one day with exactly the same prompt, you might get a slightly different output on another day. So I've never had the green background before. I don't know why it's decided to do that, but it could be learning off my preferences. But it's actually done a pretty good job of distilling the key parts of that relatively complicated kind of doctorate level paper in astrophysics. So I was really trying to test it with the most complex things that I could do. And it actually turns out to be pretty powerful. Now, clearly this needs a huge amount of validation. How do I know that the slides and the topics it's chosen in here are the key topics within that document? I mean, short of reading that entire 11,000 word document and coming up with what I think are the most important parts, very difficult thing to validate, really difficult thing to validate. But if I just wanted a short synopsis, as visual as possible, about the contents of that paper, actually giving it to PowerPoint and getting PowerPoint within, or CoPilot within PowerPoint to do it, is not a bad little idea as well. And then I want to show you one final thing in terms of the live demo, and I know that we're tight for time. And it's the interaction with our work aspects as well. So there is a Firebrand Golf Charity Day coming up at the end of June, I think it is. And for some reason, I'm playing in that charity day. And when I say for some reason, I'm not the greatest golfer in the world. Not necessarily it transpires, but I'm not the greatest golfer in the world. I can swing, but there's lots of emails and Teams chats bouncing around in terms of the charity golf day. So what I'm going to do is, and this is the Microsoft 365 Copilot. So if you log into 365 through your browser, you'll get access to this. You can see the Copilot bit of functionality there, and it will go through all my emails and any other shared documents, Yammer post as well, and it'll provide quite a decent little guidance in terms of the Firebrand charity golf day. Now, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, and then I don't know, give money to my charity golf day, particularly in the fact that I've only ever played one round of golf in a row, and for this charity Firebrand golf day, it's 4 rounds of golf in a row. So I expect to be ruined. So if you do follow me on LinkedIn, you can totally give some money to charity around that.
Sean, can you just unmute yourself?
You're not going to tell me I've been muted for the last 20 minutes, are you, Adrian?
No. Just for a few seconds.
Good skills. So you can see that's quite an effective aggregation of some of the key bits around Firebrand's charity golf day. You want to follow me on LinkedIn and kind of pledge some money to charity, because me doing 4 rounds of golf in one day, you know what, that probably deserves some money to charity, I would suggest, particularly if you've ever seen me play golf. Right, final few slides. Oh, if I can get back to my PowerPoint deck, which is struggling. There we go. So we've done the live demo. Next bit I want to talk to you about very quickly, because conscious of time, is CoPilot Labs. So what CoPilot Labs is a collection of prompts that kind of helps us explore and experiment with CoPilot. We can also see how other experts and other users are using CoPilot and learn from their tips and tricks. And this kind of centers on that concept of prompt engineering. When you give these large language models a prompt, generate, I don't know, a bedtime story for my daughter, we're prompting it. And there is this concept of prompt engineering. And prompt engineering is the skill of knowing when and how to ask CoPilot or any other large language model to do something for you. It's like giving instructions to a smart assistant. So you want to be clear, concise, as specific as possible, so that CoPilot can understand your goals and deliver the kind of best results. And by learning prompt engineering, you can make the most out of AI, and clearly that will hopefully boost your productivity, creativity, and efficiency. But if you're really struggling with coming up with prompts, CoPilot Lab is that collection of prompts from lots and lots of different users. There's also the ability within CoPilot, there's kind of a little book button there, and that will kind of suggest prompts to you as well. Generally speaking, when it's suggesting prompts, they're probably not the ones I'm looking for, but they do give you a good start for 10 in terms of how they're created and how they're running as well. But the key thing to remember about CoPilot and CoPilot Labs is that these aren't static features, and they're going to evolve and adapt as CoPilot becomes smarter and more advanced. So particularly when we're putting prompts and getting results from CoPilot Web, those prompts are being used in the CoPilot training data set as well, to train the model. And we need to be aware of that. And there's obviously the consequence in terms of not wanting to put work-related material into the web version of CoPilot. But actually, we need to accept that the outputs and the outcomes from CoPilot will potentially change over time. Not necessarily hugely amusingly, but when ChatGPT first came out, for whatever reason, I asked it what would end humanity, and ChatGPT said it would, and I said, but we would predict that, and we would take away any of your ability to end humanity, like access nuclear weapons and stuff like that. And ChatGPT actually said it would have predicted that outcome and that humans would have done that, and it would have worked around that, which was a little bit shocking in one sense. I asked it exactly the same question the day after, and it came up with a completely different response, one that wasn't in line with AI taking over the world. Next slide, please, Sean. So in terms of the plans and future developments, very much a plan around customization from Microsoft. So Copilot GPTs are going to allow us to customize the behavior of a Copilot on a topic that's a particular interest to us. There's going to be a handful of Copilot specific GPTs rolling out, and relatively benign and bland stuff like fitness, travel, cooking. But actually, if you take it to an organizational standpoint, you could have an organizational Copilot, but then you might have a finance Copilot, you might have a logistics Copilot, an ops Copilot, an HR Copilot. And so over time, they'll be more specialized, more specific to the actual needs as well. Copilot is going onto the mobile, so it's available for Android and iOS. So it allows you to use Copilot on the fly as well. And there's just a little bit of wrapping our heads around the different types of Copilot as well. So there is a free version, and you can see the capabilities in the free version in terms of commercial data protection, web grounding, and its foundational capabilities. If you're a private individual and you want to pay for a Copilot license, you would almost definitely go for the pro version. And you can see it's got all the elements of the free plus priority access to the model and Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote Copilots. You also get the capability to do your own GPT builder as well. And then probably the one that we're going to experience most frequently is Copilot for organizations. So you can see the price point, the capabilities. So on top of Copilot and Copilot Pro, you're going to get Copilot in Teams, the graph grounding element to it, the enterprise grade data protection as well, and access to Copilot Studio. So if you're an organization and you want to develop a Copilot specifically for HR or for finance or for your team, you're probably in a Copilot Studio place. And final couple of slides from me. Clearly, Firebrand are a training organization, and we have lots and lots of training courses in the AI space. Clearly, this space will increase in terms of the number of courses and the topics that those kind of courses cover. So we've got some really good courses at a foundational level from a partner of ours called CertNexus, Gen AI Biz and AI Biz, and also the Certified Artificial Intelligence practitioner as well. From more of a Microsoft point of view, and I suppose this is probably what we've been touching on quite a little bit, is this crafting of effective prompts for Microsoft 365. There's a specific course around that, although we do have more intermediate and advanced courses around Azure AI, Azure AI fundamentals, embedding stuff like OpenAI, ChatGPT within Microsoft environments as well. From the ISO point of view, there's a bit more around how we might validate the use and control the use of these large language models and AI within businesses as well. Really good partner of ours, the British Computer Society. They got some relatively foundation and intermediate courses around AI with certifications as well. And then we got iStacker as well, who are also delivering some kind of fundamental and foundation courses around artificial intelligence. The website is up there. So if you want to go on Firebrand, training.co or firebrand.training/UK/courses and AI certifications, you'll see all the AI courses that we're currently running. I think it's fair to say that those number of courses will not diminish over time. They're only likely to increase, and they are becoming incredibly popular. So if you did want to get on one of those, make sure you get in there as well. Final couple of slides from me. One is around the kind of governance approach, specifically applicable for only small and medium enterprises. So it's the procurement of AI skills effectively. So the kind of bullet points here, there's just under £6.5 million of funding for 24-25. It's only for UK-based SMEs, and an SME is characterized as an organization that's been in work for more than a year and has between 1 and 249 employees. It's not entirely funded, so it's up to 50% funding for some of those AI skills training. And actually those courses that I flicked on before, you would be able to apply for 50% funding in and around that. The expressions of interests are by the 23rd of April, which is probably about 6 or 7 days ago. But the grant applications process is open until the 1st of May, so you've got a little bit of time. And Firebrand are an approved training provider as well. And I will stick into the chat that little link there just in a second, after I've shown you the Rembrandt style questions and answers slide that I've got. So this is me going into Bing Image Creator, and Bing Image Creator is like, I suppose, DALL-E, but specifically for the Microsoft environment. So you can prompt anything you want in terms of Bing Image Creator. So I've asked for a questions and answers style on the slide of Rembrandt. And whilst I am no art historian or art expert, that doesn't look too shabby. That doesn't look too shabby. So I will open up the floor for any questions and see whether Adrian has been gathering any over time. But let me try and stop sharing to start with. That might be a good place to
I have got
start.
a few questions, Sean, that are on the chat, so we'll
Cool.
start with those, I guess. How many times did you validate some queries to build trust that any outcomes are correct? And I guess that is in relation when that question came in around use of Microsoft Excel, etc. So the validation issue with it.
The validation piece, I think it's really tricky, and it's really tricky, particularly at the outset. I think one of the things we're going to need to accept is that these large language models are based on their training data, and their training data is potentially being updated all of the time, particularly when those large language models are taking some of the prompts and using it as training data. I would suggest you need to do oodles and oodles and oodles worth of validation, particularly at the outset. So, for instance, taking that 11,000 word kind of astrophysics paper and it distilling down to 20 slides. How do I know that that's actually the salient 20 slides? How do I know there aren't more important facets that it's not picked up? So there's going to need to be effectively a policy developed internally. You're going to have to think about what type of policies do you want to wrap around the use of this type of information, and particularly at the outset of the use of this type of technology, we're going to need to be comfortable with the fact that they're potentially going to develop different outputs for us. But actually, that might then facilitate the necessity to start developing your own large language models within your own organization. So starting to use CoPilot Studio, using all the wealth of information that ChatGPT and GPT-4 has gathered, but augmenting it. And then it's about governance frameworks in terms of how can we test the outputs? Are those outputs legitimate? How are we going to advise and guide some of the people within our organizations in terms of its use? Is very much at the early stage. Is it consistent yet? It's not. The outputs aren't consistent. That's the first time I've ever seen it create green colored slides to that astrophysics paper. So every time I'm prompting it, whilst 90% of the output is consistent, there is still 10% which is inconsistent. And we're going to have to make individual organizational decisions in terms of whether we take action, whether we don't take action, how we're going to validate it. Does it require an external validation process? But I think over time, as this technology kind of embeds itself into the way our understanding and our work much more effectively, over time, the kind of variance in terms of the outputs is going to diminish. But I think we need to be comfortable with the fact of that if we want a really powerful large language model, we want one that's constantly training. If we're going to have one that's constantly training, we're going to have to be equally comfortable that the output may well change. So effectively, it's validation. And what kind of governance strategies, frameworks do you apply to that kind of validation piece? Hopefully that's answered that.
Sure. So a question that's linked to that: how is data privacy managed? How is the data used? Who can access it? How is it used by CoPilot?
Well, that harks back, and if I just flick back to one of those slides I put on a little bit of time ago. So if I maximize that and then attempt to share again, let's share this slide. In terms of that privacy piece, remember we've got the, can I have a laser pen, please, PowerPoint? Yes, there we go. We've got that work bit, we've got that web bit. So this is, I haven't seen this replicated in other large language models. I've only seen this on CoPilot to begin with, but I would suggest there's every chance that every large language model will work in this way. So anything that you put into the web will get used in the training data set. So what you don't want to do is put any commercially sensitive information, any IP. You do not want to be using the web version. You want to be using the work version, because when we're in the work version, anything that you prompt the work version is not going to be used in the training data set, which, you know what, I think that's a feather in Microsoft and Copilot's hat. I certainly haven't seen this functionality built into ChatGPT, but by the same token, I probably haven't used ChatGPT for a few weeks because I've got access to CoPilot. So just be very, I think, as a general rule of using artificial intelligence, I think you've got to be as specific as you need to be without being excessively specific, because in the likes of ChatGPT and Claude AI and the other realms of large language models, they're going to use your prompts in their training data. And do you want that information to be part of a wider training data set? So actually CoPilot handles this really well with its work and web capability. So if you're going to be using sensitive stuff, if you want to have more outputs from some of the internal documents that you've got, use the work version. You're doing something relatively bland, maybe something on a personal basis, use the web version. But you've got to be really effectively work on the proviso that anything that you provide to that large language model is going to be used by that. You've effectively given up responsibility to it. You've given it to the large language model. And that's where I think CoPilot comes into its own, because it really nicely separates out that, am I doing this for work or am I doing this for the web?
One question around PowerPoint, and don't know if you've tried this yet, Sean, or not. But can you feed an existing presentation into, obviously open up in PowerPoint and then ask CoPilot how you can improve it?
Yeah, you totally can. And I might be shocked at the level of improvements it's going to suggest. Can you improve the deck I'm using? It might do this. I am using currently. It will probably almost definitely do that. But what it tends not to do, it probably, I would guess, and I haven't ever asked it to do this before, because I make perfect presentations first time around, obviously, whether it will carry on kind of the branding and the little bits of kind of Firebrand at the bottom, and then sometimes it will just say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can answer general purpose questions, but for additional things, you know what, if I said to it, can you improve this deck, and gave it the SharePoint location the deck's stored in, it will definitely come up with a different kind of approach to it. Could I be confident it would keep all of the same fonts, the same banners and stuff like that? It probably wouldn't do that. It would just look at the information and maybe suggest a different kind of approach to it. But I suppose then you get the ability to change the tone, make it more formal, make it less formal, that type of stuff. But yeah, quickly prompting using CoPilot can be a bit dangerous, because generally it won't give you the response you want. But I reckon, I'm not going to put you through this, but if you gave me kind of 10 minutes and I was just to enhance the types of prompts I was going to use, I could probably get it to rejig this decking and supply some different kind of options and stuff like that. But I will not put you through that as it stands. Any more, AD?
Just one question, but I think we've probably covered it. Was, well, how do you access CoPilot? If you've got Office 365, is it a free install or an add-on?
So there's a couple of different ways. So if you have got it installed, it's going to be a little button. So you can see the little button in the top right here in PowerPoint. If I go on to, let me shut it down and then load it up again so you can see it from first principles. If I go into Office 365, but the web version, here we go, office.com. You can see the kind of standard bits there and the ability for me to access Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and then we've got the specific kind of CoPilot here. So the way I would kind of characterize this, and I think this will become more and more clear over time, if you want a really generic approach that searches everything, so you can see some of the prompts that it's actually getting. So what was the latest from this person, organized by emails, chats, and files? So it clearly has access to Outlook, access to Teams, Outlook, access to OneDrive, etc., etc., etc. And you won't necessarily find that within the prompts within PowerPoint, for instance. Well, these would be really PowerPoint focused prompts. If you were to log into Office 365, but the browser version, you're going to get that kind of aggregated search function, which is actually super, super powerful. The ability to search across all of your Teams chats, all of your emails, all of your Microsoft Word documents, Excel documents, PowerPoint documents. That's incredibly, incredibly powerful. How much validation have I done? So if I said to it, give me all of my AI PowerPoints, it would quite easily give me all of the PowerPoints on AI, but I would still have to validate that. How do I know the 7 it's given me are just the 7 I've created? So there's still that kind of validation bit. Hopefully that's answered that question. Any more from the chat, Adi?
No, that's it from the chat. I'm just having a look at Microsoft CoPilot. Question being asked: is it available on Mac versions of Office 365 yet? I don't know if you know that off the top of your head. I was just
I think I'm not an extensive Mac user, so forgive me, but because you can access it from a browser, so I can access CoPilot from a browser. And if I go into Word, but the browser version, am I going to get the CoPilot button on the browser version? This will be a little test on the fly, and I do. So even if you were on a Mac, and I'm not sure, I haven't got a Mac, I can't tell you the desktop version whether it's got access to CoPilot, but you can see if you've got a Mac, you can certainly access a browser, and that CoPilot functionality is within the browser version and the kind of desktop version or client version as well. Hopefully that answers that. Seems like it's not in the Mac version of Office 365 yet. It's very much in preview. So it's taking a while for it to start to purvey. And when I first got it installed, it probably took about 3 days in order to get the full functionality. So one day I might have had the PowerPoint, but it wasn't on Excel. And the next day I would PowerPoint and Excel. And the day after I might have PowerPoint, Word, Excel, and OneNote or something like that. So it wasn't like a traditional installation where I just install it and the whole thing was available. And maybe that's because of the way that we implemented it within Firebrand, but it was almost iterative. So I got PowerPoint CoPilot first, then I got the functionality in Excel, and the day after I got it in Word, and the day after I got it in another tool. So maybe that's more to do with the way that Firebrand kind of implemented it internally, but I haven't seen it implemented kind of other organizations to kind of compare and contrast. Any more for any more, Adi?
No, that's it on the chat.
Happy days. Well, hopefully you'll have found that of interest. Thank you for watching and listening today. Hopefully watching CoPilot generate an output kind of wasn't too laborious. Hopefully you got a lot of stuff out of this. We will be launching this webinar on our YouTube channel, so you can listen to my dulcet tones as many times as possible. But if you've not got any other questions, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And join us next time for responsible artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, Matthew, have you got a question, or are you just sticking your hand up?
Cheers, guys.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thank you.
See you now. Bye-bye.
Bye.